Have you ever wondered why certain everyday objects appear again and again in the world's most ancient spiritual traditions? A lit candle, a bit of water, a handful of salt. Objects so simple we overlook them every day. Yet, for our ancestors, they contain profound wisdom about life itself. Today I want to share with you a teaching that was passed down to me when I was just a young student in Jerusalem over 60 years ago. A teaching that my master, may his memory be a blessing, received from his master, and so on, in an unbroken chain connecting us to sages who lived 3,000 years ago. My name is Rabbi Shimon. I am 83 years old. I have dedicated my life to the study of Torah and Kabbalah. I spent 13 years of my youth in a cave, studying the sacred texts day and night, seeking to understand not just the words, but the soul of the words. And now, in this stage of my life, I feel called to share these ancestral teachings, not as magic formulas, but as tools for reflection, as bridges between our daily lives and the deeper dimensions of our existence. What you're going to hear today is not a promise of instant wealth. It is not a shortcut to avoid honest work. It is something far more valuable. It is an invitation to understand how our Jewish ancestors cultivated a mindset of abundance through symbolic practices that transform their relationship with resources, with time, with gratitude, and with the sacred. Shalom, my friends. Welcome to this space of learning. If this teaching resonates with you, if you feel that ancestral knowledge deserves to be preserved for future generations, I invite you to share your reflection at the end, not as a magical act, but as an act of recognition that you were here learning, connecting with ancient traditions that have sustained entire communities through exiles, persecutions, and rebirths. Now let me tell you about something we call in Jewish tradition the Brit HaMelach, the covenant of salt. But before I explain what this covenant is, I need to take you 3,000 years back in time to the Temple of Jerusalem when it still stood. In the book of Leviticus, chapter 2, verse 13, it is written, "Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings." Notice the specificity of this instruction. It doesn't simply say, "Bring salt." It says, "the salt of the covenant of your God." In Hebrew thought, every word, every syllable in the sacred texts has layers of meaning. Salt here is not a condiment. It is a symbol of something eternal. Think about the physical properties of salt. Salt does not rot. Salt does not corrupt over time. Before modern refrigeration, our ancestors used salt to preserve meat, fish, cheese, everything they wanted to last. Salt was literally the agent of permanence in a world where everything else decomposed. The sages of Kabbalah took this physical property and elevated it to a spiritual concept. They said if salt preserves in the material world, then it symbolizes preservation in the spiritual world. If salt maintains the integrity of food, then it represents the integrity of covenants, of commitments, of intentions. And here we arrive at a fundamental concept in Kabbalistic teaching, the concept of the Keli, the vessel. In Hebrew, Keli means container receptacle, but in Kabbalah, Keli refers to our capacity to receive. Maimonides, the great philosopher and physician of the 12th century, taught that the universe functions with a constant abundance of shefa, of divine flow. That flow is always present, like sunlight. The problem is not that there is a lack of light. The problem is whether our vessels are open or closed, whether they are clean or cracked, whether they are prepared to receive or not. This is a profound metaphor about how we experience life. Two people can live in the same city, have the same education, work in the same field, and yet one experiences constant abundance while the other experiences perpetual scarcity. Why? The Kabbalists would say because the quality of their internal vessels is different, and this is where the symbol of salt takes on its deepest meaning. Salt in Jewish tradition represents the sealing of the vessel, not to close it, but to protect its integrity, to ensure that when abundance arrives, it finds a space capable of holding it. The Baal Shem Tov, founder of the Hasidic movement in the 18th century, used to say, "The problem is not that blessing does not arrive. The problem is that our hearts have holes through which blessing escapes before we can recognize it. Those holes are our scarcity-based thought patterns. They are our inherited beliefs about money. They are our unconscious fears. They are our inability to be present when abundance is here, because we are so worried about tomorrow that we don't see today." The practice of Brit HaMelach does not magically repair those holes, but it does serve as a physical reminder, as a practice of spiritual mindfulness, as an anchor that returns us again and again to the awareness that we are vessels in an abundant universe. Now I want to explain to you how this traditional practice is performed not as a formula that guarantees results, but as an exercise in spiritual reflection that has been passed down from generation to generation in Jewish families. This is a traditional practice of spiritual reflection, not a financial solution. Its value lies in the exercise of mindfulness, conscious intention, and connection with ancestral traditions. I invite you to approach this with respect for the culture from which it comes, and with honesty about your own expectations. Step 1. Preparing the sacred space. In a moment of calm when you can be present without distractions, you take a transparent glass container. Why glass? In Jewish symbolism, glass represents clarity, transparency before Hashem, before the divine. It also represents fragility, a reminder that material life is delicate and requires conscious care. You fill that container with coarse salt, sea salt, if possible. Coarse salt, as opposed to refined salt, represents the natural, the unprocessed, that which maintains its original integrity. This simple act of filling a container with salt is already in itself a meditation. It is a moment of pause. It is an act of intention. You are not simply filling a glass. You are creating a space for reflection, spiritual meaning. This first step represents our willingness to create sacred spaces in the midst of the everyday. The kitchen, that place where we transform ingredients into nourishment, becomes a domestic altar, a place where the material and the spiritual meet every day. It is not a magic formula. It is a physical reminder that every act in our home can be elevated through conscious intention. Step 2, the symbol of commitment. You take a coin. Its monetary value does not matter. What matters is its symbolic value. In Jewish tradition, the coin represents the fruit of our labor, the tangible result of our effort in the world. Before placing the coin in the salt, you take a moment to reflect. You can ask yourself questions like these. What is my current relationship with money? Does it come from fear or from trust, from scarcity or from gratitude? What beliefs about resources did I inherit from my family? Which of those beliefs serve me and which limit me? Then, with full presence, you introduce the coin into the center of the salt, covering it completely until it disappears from sight. Spiritual meaning. This act symbolizes Tzimtzum, a profound Kabbalistic concept. Tzimtzum means contraction, withdrawal, concealment. According to the Kabbalists, God created the universe not through expansion, but through contraction, making space, so that the finite could exist within the infinite. When you conceal the coin in the salt, you are practicing your own Tzimtzum. You are withdrawing the symbol of material value from immediate sight, creating a space of trust. It is the opposite of hoarding based on fear. It is a gesture that says, I trust that when I let go of obsessive control, when I let go of the need to constantly see and count, abundance finds ways to flow. Connection with tradition. Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the 1st century, taught that everything the merciful one does, he does for good. This phrase summarizes an attitude toward life that Jewish families have cultivated for millennia, the ability to trust in the midst of uncertainty. It is not naivety. It is a conscious choice not to live enslaved by fear. Step 3, conscious placement. The container with the salt and the coin is placed in a high place in the kitchen. A shelf, the top of the cupboard, a place where it is visible, but not in the way. Why the kitchen? Because in Jewish tradition, the kitchen is the heart of the home. It is where matter is transformed into sustenance. It is where the family gathers. It is where 3 times a day we participate in the act of nourishing ourselves. Why high in Kabbalistic symbolism elevation represents spiritual aspiration, not as escapism from material reality, but as recognition that material reality has invisible dimensions that deserve our attention. That container remains there for a complete lunar cycle, approximately 30 days. Spiritual meaning. During that month, every time you enter the kitchen, every time you prepare food, you see the container. You don't have to do anything special. Just see it. And in seeing it, remember. Remember what? Remember your intention. Remember that you are cultivating a mindset of abundance. Remember that life is more than the urgency of the day to day. Remember that you are part of an ancient tradition that has navigated times of exile and times of prosperity with the same fundamental faith. Personal reflection. What does this mean for you? Perhaps it means creating rituals of presence in your life. Perhaps it means honoring the work of your hands in a more conscious way. Perhaps it means breaking patterns of anxiety that you inherited and consciously choosing a different relationship with resources. At the end of the 30-day cycle, the closing of the practice is performed. You take the coin from among the salt, clean it, and use it to buy something essential, preferably food. Why food? Because in Kabbalah there is a principle called tikkun, repair, or rectification. The spiritual energy that has been contained during the month of reflection is released through an act of sustenance, of nourishment, of life. It is not magic. It is conscious symbolism. It is the understanding that our physical actions can be imbued with spiritual meaning when we perform them with intention. And the salt that remains in the container also has its own traditional use. You can take it to the entrance of your home and sprinkle a small amount on the threshold. In Hebrew tradition, the threshold is the line between the outer world and the sanctuary of the home. It is the place where we say, here inside we cultivate peace. Here inside we cultivate presence. Here inside we honor the sacred in the everyday. I want to tell you something important about the moment we are in. This month corresponds approximately to the Hebrew month of Nissan in the Jewish calendar. Nissan is the month when, according to the Torah, the people of Israel left slavery in Egypt. The sages of the Talmud affirm, in Nissan they were freed, and in Nissan they will be freed in the future. This is not an apocalyptic prophecy. It is an understanding that certain moments of the year carry within themselves archetypes of transformation. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. It comes from the root mitzar, which means narrowness, limitation, constriction. In Kabbalistic teaching, Mitzrayim is not just a geographical place. It is a state of consciousness. It is the mentality that says, this is all there is. Here, my possibility ends. The Exodus Yetziat Mitzrayim in Hebrew is not just a historical event. It is an archetype of liberation that each person can experience when they choose to leave their own self-imposed limitations. The month of Nissan, then, is considered in tradition as a propitious time for practices of spiritual renewal, for leaving behind old patterns, for opening ourselves to new possibilities. This does not mean that if you do this practice in Nissan, your bank account will magically multiply. It means that practices of spiritual reflection, when performed at moments our tradition considers significant, can have a deeper impact on our consciousness. I want to be very clear with you. This practice I have shared with you is part of Jewish cultural heritage. It has been transmitted in Sephardic and Ashkenazi families for generations. Some families perform it annually. Others perform it at moments of transition, when moving to a new house, when starting a new venture, when welcoming a new family member. They do not perform it because they believe it is a spell that attracts money from heaven. They perform it because it is a way of marking significant moments with spiritual consciousness. It is a way of saying, this new beginning, I begin with intention. I begin at honoring the invisible dimensions of life. In my own life, I have seen families that practice these traditional rituals and families that do not. And I can tell you honestly, the ritual itself does not make anyone rich. What makes the difference is the mindset the ritual cultivates. Jewish families that have prospered through generations, even in the midst of persecutions and exiles, share certain characteristics: a deep appreciation for education, a rigorous work ethic, a tradition of tzedakah, of giving generously, a capacity for cultural adaptation, and yes, also a rich tradition of spiritual practices that maintain their connection with the sacred in the midst of the everyday. The Brit HaMelach is one of those practices. It is not the magic key to prosperity. It is a thread in the complex tapestry of a worldview that sees material life and spiritual life as inseparable. Allow me to share with you the words of the great Maimonides, who in the 12th century wrote, "The perfection of man does not consist only in what he acquires for himself, but in what he comes to understand about the functioning of the universe and his place in it." This teaching I have shared with you today is not for you to acquire more things. It is for you to understand more deeply your place in the universe, your relationship with resources, your capacity to cultivate gratitude, your connection with traditions that have sustained entire peoples through millennia. If you decide to perform this practice, do it with respect. Do it with understanding that you are touching something that is sacred to millions of people. Do it without the expectation of magical results, but with openness to subtle transformations in your consciousness. And if this practice does not resonate with you, if your spiritual path is different, that is also fine. Jewish wisdom teaches that there are 70 faces of the Torah, 70 ways of understanding truth. What matters is not that we all follow the same path, but that each one walks their path with integrity, with presence, with gratitude. Before I say goodbye, I want to offer you a traditional blessing. In Hebrew we say, Yevarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha, Yer Adonai panav elecha vichuneka, Yisa Adonai panav elecha vayasem lecha. Shalom. May the Eternal bless you and keep you. May the Eternal make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Eternal lift up his face toward you and give you peace. This is the priestly blessing found in the book of Numbers, chapter 6. It is a blessing that has been pronounced over the Jewish people for 3,000 years. And the final word of that blessing is shalom, peace, not prosperity, not wealth, peace. Because our sages understood something profound, a person can have all the riches in the world and not have peace. And a person can have modest resources and live in profound peace. And between those two options, peace is the true treasure. The practice I have shared with you today, the Brit HaMelach, is not a path to wealth. It is a path to peace with your resources, to peace with your effort, to peace with what you have and what you do not have, to the understanding that you are part of an abundant universe and that your work is to cultivate an internal vessel capable of receiving that abundance with gratitude and sharing it with generosity. If these ancestral teachings resonate in your heart, if you feel that it is worthwhile to preserve this wisdom for future generations, I invite you to share your reflection, not as a magical ritual, but as an act of recognition that you are here learning, connecting with ancient traditions. And if you know someone who could benefit from this perspective on abundance, share this message with them, not out of obligation, but out of love for learning, not to promise miracles, but to offer a window into a different worldview. I have dedicated 83 years of my life to the study of these traditions, not because I believed they would make me rich, but because they make me human in a deeper way. They connect me with generations that came before me. They give me a language to speak about the invisible. They offer me tools to navigate life with greater awareness. And now in this stage of my life, my greatest joy is to transmit these teachings, not to create followers, not to build an empire, but because these seeds of wisdom deserve to be planted in new hearts, in new lands, in new generations. May salt preserve your integrity. May the eternal covenant remind you of your connection with the sacred. And may the Shefa, the flow of abundance of the universe, find in you a prepared, open, and grateful vessel. Shalom ubracha, peace and blessing. May you walk in peace. May you work in peace. May you receive in peace. And may you give in peace. I have shared with you a 3,000-year-old tradition, not as a quick solution to complex problems, but as an invitation to a more conscious, more connected, more grateful way of living. The rest of the journey is yours. Walk it with integrity. Walk it with presence. Walk it knowing that you are heir to ancestral wisdom, and that this inheritance is not measured in coins, but in understanding. Shalom.